Hey everyone, welcome back. Remember that no matter the form of your baptism or the church of your membership, there's a place for you here, wherever you are in the journey with God, because this is God's table. So pull up a chair and come to the table. Let's settle in together with some of those deep breaths that we've been taking, finding that wave, right, where we just kind of go into the flow of a good couple of deep breaths. If you need to sigh it out today, you sure can. If you need to bring those shoulders up and roll them back down, that's another great option too. Whatever you need today to settle in, let's do that together over the course of a few breaths. Here we go. Today, we continue in this sub-series of a man who had two sons, going through those stories that inform us a little bit more about that prodigal son, the lost son story. Each of these stories has conflict between brothers, the younger son being favored over the older son. The conflict between them, one ending in murder, one ending in reconciliation, and a fulfilled promise of descendants as many as the stars for the father of those two sons. And today we have the third story that helps us think about that lost son and that the younger son being favored over the older son. This is a really familiar story for a lot of people. This is Jacob and Esau. And this is also found in the book of Genesis, chapter in the 20s. There's a lot. These stories spread over lots and lots of chapters now. So Isaac has grown up, right? He's the son of Abraham and Sarah. He is the branch of that family tree that will Christian folks will trace their ancestry back through to Abraham. And he had a brother Ishmael, and that's who our Muslim brothers and sisters will trace their faith ancestry through all the way back to Abraham. We talked about that a lot in the last video. So Isaac grows up. He marries a woman named Rebecca, and they have twins, Jacob and Esau. And now here's the interesting thing about Jacob and Esau and the twins. They wrestled together in their mother's womb. From the very beginning, there was conflict. Now, I have never had twins, but I have carried children in my body, and it is uncomfortable. So I can't imagine two children wrestling. Kudos to any of you moms of multiples out there. Esau is born first, so he is the oldest according to tradition, right? You know, I've known some twins and triplets in my life, and they know their time of birth down to the second sometimes because they want to know who's the oldest. It's like that for these two brothers as well. Except Jacob is already, he's born holding on to Esau's heel. So um, imagine, right? Uh, they're wrestling even till the moment of being born. Um, and Jacob is trying to usurp Esau even then. He's named Jacob because that name sounds very similar to the name for heel, right? So he can be described as a heel. Um, and so Jacob and Esau struggle their whole lives together, their whole time. Um, Esau is kind of the definition of an ancient Near Eastern manly man. He's very hairy. He goes out and he hunts um, wild game, and that's how he helps provide for his family. Jacob stays closer to home, and he would be considered a mama's boy. Um, he would be considered, if we're looking at kind of that cultural idea of masculinity and femininity, especially in the ancient Near East, Jacob stayed with Rebecca, his mother, and did cooking and some of those more like homey tasks, which for some of you is like cool, um, you know. But in that time, those were very uh, strict roles, right? And it was very unusual for a man to be uh, staying with his mother and cooking and those kinds of things, right? It was very prescribed, the roles that men and women lived in. So there's a conflict there too. Then, as Isaac and Rebecca, or excuse me, as Jacob and Esau have grown, right? Jacob spends his time with Rebecca. Esau is this stereotypical manly man of the ancient Near East. And so Isaac favors Esau, the older one, and Rebecca favors Jacob, the younger one. And Isaac is old in this section of the story, and he is going blind, and he is dying, and he wants to bestow his blessing on his oldest son Esau before he dies. It's a ritual that takes place in the ancient Near East. And so Rebecca and Jacob cook up a plan, and I intended that pun. When Esau goes out to hunt, Jacob gets dressed in oh, I forgot a super important part of the story that happens even before this. Okay, so Esau comes in from hunting one day, and he's starving. And of course, Jacob is there, and he has made this lentil stew. And Esau's like, oh, I'm so hungry. I would do anything for a bowl of stew, right? It's a perfect setup. And Jacob says, trade me your birthright. I want to receive our father's blessing. And Esau's like, yeah. I'm hungry. Can I have some stew, please? And so Esau foolishly trades his birthright for a bowl of lentil soup. Now, I like lentil soup, but not that much. But of course, you know, Isaac isn't really going to go along with that. And Rebecca and the rest of the family know that. So when Isaac says, I'm ready to bestow my blessing, they figure out a way to really get it done. Okay. So they cook up this plan, because that was a good pun. And Esau is out hunting. Jacob covers himself with the skin of a goat so that he's hairy like Esau and so that he smells like Esau. Remember, because Isaac can't see, he's blind. And he takes this meal into Isaac and says, here I am, your oldest son. Now, maybe Isaac also can't hear very well because you'd think, or maybe they sounded really similar. I'm not sure. But anyway, he receives Jacob's blessing, or Jacob receives the blessing from Isaac that was meant for Esau. Um, and Esau comes back from hunting and comes in and says, Father, I'm ready. He has heard that his father is ready to give this blessing. He asks his father for the blessing, and Isaac is like, what are you talking about? I already gave you the blessing. And they realize they've been tricked. And they cry and mourn and wail. And, Isaac is like, I can't take it back. You get this secondary blessing, but I've given it all over to Jacob. And Jacob hears this crying and wailing, and he gets so afraid that Esau is going to murder him, an echo of our first story of Cain and Abel, that he runs away. And Rebecca sends him away to her family in another land, where he meets Rachel and Leah, and that whole story begins to unfold. So years and years and years pass. Jacob is still a trickster. He's still a deceiver. He has almost met his match in his father-in-law. So he goes to his mother's family and meets Rachel at the well. She's beautiful. He wants her to be his wife. And Rachel's father says, sure, work for me for 7 years and you can have her as your wife. They get to the marriage ceremony. They take off the veil at the end of the ceremony. And who is there? Not Rachel, but Leah, her older sister. So there's this current of the younger being favored over the older among these sisters as well. And Jacob is mad, but he says, okay, I'll work for another 7 years for you. And then I'll marry your daughter, Rachel, as well. See, family values in scripture. Jacob marries 2 women, and that was like what the deal was in that time. There's lots of great values in scripture, but family values are real tricky there. And so this happens. And then there's all sorts of issues around who can have babies and who can't have babies, and which babies are favored, which children are favored, which sons are favored, right? All of this stuff. It's a whole other story. But at one point in the midst of this story, Jacob and his family trick his father-in-law, and they leave. They're going to go set out on their own. And while they are traveling, Jacob wrestles with an angel or a messenger from God, which is another one of my favorite stories in scripture, and receives a blessing, but also receives a limp in this process. He's waiting to cross the river because his brother Esau has heard that he is traveling through, and Esau wants to meet him, and Jacob is terrified. So he sends gifts to Esau. He sends all his livestock and all his family across the river first, and then he stays behind and wrestles, receives this blessing from God, and then crosses the river to go meet his brother, fearful that meeting his brother is going to get him and his whole family killed. And instead, when they meet, Esau falls on his knees and sobs with gratitude for their reconciliation, with joy for their being reunited. And Jacob asks for forgiveness, and it's granted, and they live in peace between the two of them. It's a really beautiful story. I love Jacob and his story for a lot of reasons, but I think this is such an interesting one that it mirrors that idea too of that lost son, right? In the parable that Jesus tells, the lost son goes away, wastes his life on foolish living, comes back, and the older son, is resentful. There's no reconciliation there, at least as far as scripture tells us. But in this story, that older son has let go of that anger and that resentment about not receiving what was truly his to receive, and instead finds joy in the reconciliation with his brother. Now, I want you, as I'm saying that, I'm hearing in my head like that voice that tells me, well, then you need to be like Esau, right? That's where this kind of tends to go, right? You need to be like Esau and let go of your resentment and let go of your hurt and just be reconciled. And I don't know if that's exactly where we want to end up. What I think, well, let's just see what Amy Jill Levine has to help us with on this. A father had two sons, Jacob and Esau, one who stole birthright and blessing, and one who vowed murder in revenge. And yet when Jacob, wounded from his wrestling at the Jabbok River, encounters Esau, the two reconcile. So, we've heard this before, but it bears repeating again today. And let's use this as our blessing. A father had two sons, or two daughters, or two children. You can trade that out for whatever your heart needs to hear today. The details can be filled in and filled by any among us. The scriptures of Israel give us hope for the sons in Luke's parable. They should give us hope for our own reconciliations from the personal to the international. We need to take count not only of our blessings, but also of those in our families and in our communities, and once we count, we need to act. Finding the lost, whether they are sheep, coins, or people, takes work. It also requires our efforts. And from those efforts, there's the potential for wholeness and joy. So I wish you wholeness and joy today, that we may discover where there's unexpected reconciliation. And may we do the work with God to see where we can offer that in a new way. Thanks for joining me today. I'll see you again.